But I'm very, very happy to be here. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit about spiritual discernment. Just two caveats before we get in. First, we are here because we are actually concluding an anniversary year. The founder, I am a Jesuit, and the founder of the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola, as you're going to see, there's a skit in a little while. Well, he went through a very dramatic conversion in the year 1521. So that was 500 years ago. So we are celebrating that year, the year of his conversion. And one of the keys to his conversion was spiritual discernment. He started to discern, test inside what was going on in his soul. And that's what ultimately led him to turn away from sin and to live a life of service to God. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's why I chose this for my talk. But I did not actually know that we were going to have a talk about depression. Now these two things are actually related, but just so that we don't have confusion, I'll just try to explain a little bit from the beginning what the difference is. So obviously we are one being. We are body, soul, mind, all together, one, united. As George said, if you are not eating enough, that's going to affect your mind. If you're not sleeping enough, that's going to affect your mind. Right? Your body affects your mind. It's all interconnected. What your mind is doing also affects your body. And also we have a soul. Soul is the spiritual part of our nature that ultimately allows us to relate to God. What's happening in our soul affects our body, affects our mind. What happens in our mind affects our soul. But they're not all the same. So they're overlapped, they're interconnected, but they are also distinct. So what I'm going to be focusing on is spiritual things. Things of the soul. Things that relate you to God. And hopefully, it will help you in your own spiritual life. So let us begin. So maybe you find yourself, it's always important to picture where we are. Maybe you find yourself kind of like looking into a maze. You know, when you are in a maze, you can't see over the top of the wall, so you don't know where you're going, you can't see your path. A lot of the young people in the United States, I think, feel like that. Maybe the same is here. They don't know the way, they can't see the way forward. Or perhaps you're in the midst of a big decision. You can go one way or the other, and it's going to determine a lot of your life. So these are the moments when spiritual discernment can be very, very helpful. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what discernment is. It's a long tradition in the church, goes all the way back to the New Testament, at least. And I'm going to speak a little bit about external influences and then interior influences. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. And I'm going to use St. Ignatius' famous rules for the discernment of spirits. So St. Ignatius was a mystic. He had incredible mystical experiences from God, and he was given a great gift to articulate how God works in the soul, and also how the evil spirit influences the soul. And he wrote down a series of rules, which are incredibly enlightening. And we're going to look at a couple of those rules just for today. So we're going to go through that, and then we're going to apply that a little bit to the question of vocational discernment, the question of what should I do with my life. So that's the plan for this talk. During it, I'm going to give a few examples from my own life so you can hear a little bit of my testimony. But let us begin. So what is discernment? I think the best quote that captures it is from the first letter of John, chapter 4, where he says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Because many false prophets have gone out into the world." Wow, yes, that is true. Many false prophets. Of course, we know what Jesus said about false prophets in the Sermon on the Mount, very famous quote, "Beware of false prophets," Jesus said, "who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." So that's where discernment begins. When we realize that there are influences on us that are good and also bad. That there's a good spirit and an evil spirit. And also there are good people and there are bad people out there. And discernment is judging what is good and what is bad. That is the basic act of discernment. So to give a definition, discernment is the art. It's an art form. It's not a science. You can't plug in the numbers and get the answer. It is a question of judgment. It's qualitative. It's not quantitative. The art of testing the spirits, both in one's exterior influences, what's going on around you, outside of you, and in one's interior mind and heart. That's what we're going to focus on, in order to determine whether they are from God. Okay, that's discernment. So let's just unpack that for a moment. Two types of influences on us, basically, and this is an overview. There are external influences, exterior things. And there are interior things, things that are going on in our mind, our heart, our soul. So let us look. We could do a whole talk, a whole series of talk just on exterior influences. The last talk, George talked a little bit about different things, right, that are going on. But we could break it down into three main categories of exterior influences. First, personal relationships. Who you spend time with, your family and your friends primarily. Hugely influential for us. We tend to adopt and conform to who are around us. Second, the opinions of others and information that we get. In our time, the information age, we are being bombarded with all types of messages, all types of information that is influencing us. Some of it is good, some of it is not good. And that's where we have to discern. And then, of course, the broader cultural values and things that in the culture. So here in Kenya, I hear a lot about the tribes, the influence of tribes, and what your background is for all kinds of things, like what you do, what party you vote for, what candidate you vote for, and so on. Okay, those are cultural values. In the United States, the big cultural values are individualism, desire for success, and these sorts of things. Okay, that influences us. We have to discern whether these things are good or bad. So let me just give you one story from my life of exterior influences that have affected me. So I went to a boarding school in England. I have a kind of a complicated story, but I grew up in England, in fact, although I was born in America. And I think we were Form 3 here at my boarding school. So these are some of my friends. I'm the one on the middle there. Much younger. Well, when I was in Form 3, so that's junior year for America, I very much wanted to be in the cool crowd, right? And the cool crowd was actually the year above me. The guys that were sort of defining the atmosphere of the school were in the year above us, so they were in the Form 4, the top year. And for some reason, I don't exactly know how, I kind of got in with those guys. And I really wanted to fit in, and I really wanted to be cool and do what they were doing. Well, what they were doing, a lot of, was drinking, partying, going out, breaking the rules, chasing girls, that sort of thing. So when we were in boarding school, we didn't have much opportunity to do that, but in the vacation time, over Christmas, and also especially in the summer, we met up together for a week-long vacation. And we partied very, very hard. We went out at night, 9, 10 o'clock at night, didn't get back until 3, 4 in the morning, drinking, getting drunk, chasing girls, acting very, very obnoxiously. We were really, in American terms, we would say we were real jerks. Yes, jerks. I remember one time we went out, and for some reason, some guy thought it would be funny if instead of drinking the beer, we also threw the beer on people. And that was the game of that night. I don't know why. So of course, I'm the young guy, right? I'm the younger one. So I was like, Joe. So I was sitting like at a bar, we were at a bar, and I was sitting here like this, and there was a girl behind us like this. And I'm like, Joe, do it, throw more. I'm like, what? Come on, man, throw the beer on. So I turned around, okay. Splash the beer on her. It's totally soaked, doesn't know what's going on. It's not the sort of thing that you do. The guy's like, yeah, woo! Oh, awesome! Okay? So these are the sorts of things that were happening. I remember the way that we treated women, oh, goodness. We just utterly degraded. The ugly girls, we would make fun of them, we would laugh at them. The good-looking ones, of course, we would try to get with, but in a very, very slimy way, I would say. Just for the quick pleasure, and that was it. And I remember one morning I woke up, we were partying late at night, and I woke up the next morning, and I just felt, first of all, I was hungover, I had a headache, and I felt, oh my God, inside I felt incredible guilt. Because I came from a good family. My parents were loving, good people who supported us, who gave us everything we needed. And I woke up and I'm like, what kind of person am I becoming? And I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror. And I was thinking of all these things that I had done, these women that I had completely disrespected and mistreated, made feel like shit, And I'm like, is that the type of person I want to be? Just to be popular, just to fit in. So although I didn't change overnight, I remember that morning very vividly. I remember going to confession later. But I remember deciding, I'm not going to, I'm going to try to change. I'm going to try to be better. Now it took time, but that's external influences. I realized that if I was going to hang out with those guys and just listen to whatever they said and do whatever they do, I was not going to go in the right direction. So, you have to reflect upon yourself. What are the external influences that are leading you away from doing the good? But how do you know, right? So this is where discernment comes in. How did I know that this was not the right thing to do? This was not the way to live? It seems obvious because we've been well formed, but for many people it's not. But these are maybe 3 questions that we can ask. Does it cohere with the teaching of Jesus? Are you living the way Jesus teaches us? To love, serve, to forgive, to serve God. Does it cohere with the teaching of the church? Right? The church is the mother who teaches us how to follow the way of Jesus. Pretty basic, right? We know what the teachings of the church are on moral issues. So do these influences, again, they're people, but they're also information. There can also be political agendas. There are a lot of political ideologies in the United States right now that are not in conformity with the teaching of the church and with Jesus. Some people jump on those things. That's exterior influences. Is this helping me live a Christ-like life? Or not? Right? That's our goal. That's what we're called to. So let's just take a moment. We're gonna do some reflection as we go along. Let's just take a moment to think for a moment. What is one exterior influence on you that has been negative? Just think about that for a moment. Okay, maybe just it's always good to speak it out, to name it. So just turn to a partner, like a partner up, pair up. And just speak for a moment. What is one example that is like negative external influence on you? And just, tell that person, a friend. Be discerning about those exterior influences. Very, very, very important, especially today. But that's easy, right? The exterior influences, it should be a little bit easier to see what is good and what is bad there. This is where it gets more difficult. This is where we're going to spend most of the time. There are interior influences on us. And there are three main origins of these influences. So this is what St. Ignatius says. This is very ancient tradition, but this is what Ignatius says. I presuppose that there are three kinds of thoughts in my mind. Namely, one which is strictly my own thoughts, and arises wholly from my own free will. Two others, which come from without. The one from the good spirit, and the other from the evil one. Okay, so you know this sort of traditional idea that on each shoulder we have an angel, right? We've got the good angel on one shoulder, we've got the little devil on the other. Well, this is a little bit comic, right? But in the tradition, in the Catholic tradition, going all the way back really to the time of Jesus, temptation in the desert, we see this reality. In the Garden of Gethsemane, we see this reality. When the first monks went out into the desert to pray, left everything, St. Anthony and these guys, in the 2nd and 3rd century AD, same thing. They started to write about the interior movements, the good spirit and the evil spirit. So, when it comes to discernment, interior, we have to ask ourselves, where is this thought coming from? Is it coming from myself? Is it coming from the good spirit, or is it coming from the evil spirit? Right, that's the basic question of discernment at the interior level. Now, how do we know, right? That's the question. How do we know whether this thought or this movement inside is coming from the good spirit or the evil spirit, or from ourselves? How do we know that? That's where Ignatius is going to help us, because he wrote down rules to help us to discern where the thoughts were coming from. Okay, how do we know that this is from God or not? And so we're going to go over a few of them. Hopefully they will be helpful. Alright, the first rule of the rules for the discernment of spirits. St. Ignatius says, in the persons who go from mortal sin to mortal sin, the enemy, that's the evil spirit, is commonly used to propose to them apparent pleasures, making them imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and make them grow in their vices and sins. In these persons, the good spirit uses the opposite method. Pricks them and biting their consciences through the process of reason. Okay? So it's important to know like what direction you're going in, what type of person are you, right? What state are you in right now, morally and spiritually? If you're going from sin to sin, if you're going down the wrong path, away from God, the evil spirit is going to work a certain way in you, and the good spirit is going to work in a different way. Again, that's very, very important from the beginning, because each one works differently depending on where we are in our spiritual lives. But for those who are going from sin to sin, I love this, you know. The evil spirit, what does he do? He tries to keep us focused on the pleasures, on the things that are drawing us away, to hold us in our sinfulness. Just keep us down that path over and over again. So, to continue my story, I remember when I was still part of this party group, we went actually on a pilgrimage. So I was part of, it's kind of like a youth group, I suppose, but we went on a pilgrimage to Lourdes, to a shrine in France. And so we would help the pilgrims. Lourdes is a place where Our Lady appeared to St. Bernadette. And so we were there with a Catholic group. We were all cool, man, Catholic, great. But what we would do is we'd work during the day. We were helping the sick, and we would help people and go to prayer and go to Mass. But then at night, we would go out and party. And we would party for many, many hours. And then we would get like 2-3 hours sleep, and then go back to working. We'd be like walking zombies during the day. We'd sleep a couple hours, like before dinner. Go to dinner and then out partying again. That's what we did for 6 days. It was incredibly tiring, but it was also kind of fun in a certain way. But I remember one of these, I went 4 years in a row. I remember my second year was a particularly heavy year of partying. And so one of the older women who was part of the pilgrimage group, told us, because there was someone in charge of the youth. There was a youth leader, and we had to make sure that we were on good terms with the youth leader to go out to party and drink and stuff. But so the youth leader comes to us one night at dinner time, like, "Hey, there's this idea to watch this little video about St. Bernadette before we go out to the bars." And we just looked at each other like, "I don't think so. Don't want to do that." But he was saying, "No, I think it would be good for us to do this because it would show that we're trying to do the right thing." So we're like, "How long is it going to take?" 30 minutes. Oh, 30 minutes, no problem. We can catch up on the drinking time. 30 minutes is not that long. So we went to this, but we were to like a cinema, so we walked down. We don't know what's going on. This old lady was like, "Yes, this is so good for you. So many people, this is going to be wonderful." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." So we go to this cinema, and they show this feature-length film, 2 hours. The Song of Bernadette. It's a famous movie. And we're like, first 20 minutes, we're like, okay, give it 10 more minutes. All right, yeah. Mid-party. 30, 40, 50. After a while, I realized, oh no, we're screwed. This is 2 hours, 2.5 hour movie. But during that movie, so the evil spirit, what was he doing? Drinks, get out there, party. That's all. He was just keeping me focused on that. But as I started watching the movie more and more, I came to realize, wait a second. Lourdes, this place that I'm in, it's not about the bars. It's about this event of Mary, the Mother of God, appearing to this little girl. And I started to feel bad. I started to feel like really guilty. Oh my goodness. Have I been doing this all wrong? Am I taking advantage of this spiritual place just to satisfy my base desires? And I was like convicted in my heart. And so I had this kind of internal struggle, because as the movie was coming to the end, I felt like, you know what? We're not supposed to party here. We're supposed to pray. We're supposed to spend time with God and help people. But then my friends were like, no, let's go, come on, let's go. It's time now, man. We've already wasted 2 hours. But I was in that moment, I was kind of like deciding, maybe I should go out. Anyway, I was weak, so I went out anyway. I did it, but this was it. This was the first rule. I was the one going from sin to sin. And the evil spirit was just trying to keep me focused on that all the time. And the good spirit pricking my conscience, getting me to reflect. Wait a second, using my reason. Wait, that's not what this is about. That's not what Lourdes is. A party place. Okay, so that's how it works. I didn't understand at the time. When I look back, I can see what was going on. So again, take a moment to think. When have you been in this position? Maybe it's not a mortal sin. Maybe you've just been like in a sinful state. Maybe you've been in bad habits and kind of going down the wrong path. Think about that moment or that time when you were there. And then try to think whether you can identify moments where the evil spirit was working on you, just getting you to focus on the sin, just getting you to focus on the pleasure, the delight, satisfying your desires. And try to think of a moment maybe in that state where you felt guilty, where you felt this conscience pricking on your heart and getting you to reflect and to change. Okay, maybe just share again with your partner, with your friend. If you want, just share what you have. Can you give an example? We learn from each other as well. So it's helpful. Can you give an example of when this might have happened to you? Disquieting with false reasons that one may not go on. And it is proper to the good to give courage and strength, consolation, tears, inspirations, and quiet, easing and putting away all obstacles, that one may go on in doing well. Okay, so this is a person who's in a state of going from good to better, trying to grow in the Christian life, trying to follow the way of Jesus, and making progress, right? Getting better, overcoming sinfulness in a good state. So what is the good spirit going to do in that case? Is going to give strength, give consolation, give courage, give peace, in order to keep them moving in the right direction. But the evil spirit, what is the evil spirit going to do? According to St. Ignatius, is going to bite, sadden, put obstacles, disquieting with false reasons, right? Anything to draw us away, anything to pull us down, anything to get us away from the path. Right? That's how the evil spirit's going to work on us when we're trying to go in the right direction. So, for me, another story. So, how did I get to become a priest if I was just a party goer? So here's one, there are many moments in that story, but here's one moment. So when I was 18, I graduated from school, secondary school. I was going off to university, I had my place. It was all great, wonderful. And my mother, she's a good Catholic. I have 3 brothers, so there are 4 of us. She signed me up to go on this youth event called World Youth Day. This was back in the year 2000 in Rome. And I did not know what World Youth Day was. I was not involved in my youth group, not at all. And I wasn't really involved in my youth ministry or youth in the church. There wasn't much youth in the church in my time in England anyway. So I didn't really know what was going on. I wasn't really excited to go. But I went anyway. I went to Rome, and I was there for a week, and it was actually an amazing experience. And I received a very powerful grace. So the final 2 days on the Saturday, all the youth of the world, because this is an international event, they go out to a big field outside of Rome. We went. There were about 2 million of us there. We slept out in this field overnight. And there was a vigil of prayer with Pope John Paul II on that Saturday night. And then Sunday, there was a papal mass in the morning after sunrise, and then the event was over. So at this overnight vigil, 2 million people praying together. I mean, the atmosphere was absolutely electric. The energy was like better than any rock concert I've ever been to. It was really very, very powerful. And Pope John Paul II speaking to the youth was incredibly moving for me. And I received a very powerful consolation at that moment, at that night, where I was just flooded with the love of God. And I felt God's presence more powerfully than I'd ever done before. And the message of that consolation was, that I'm calling you to serve them in the church. It's no longer good enough for you to be passive. I want you to step forward and to serve. Pope John Paul II called all the youth to leadership and service in the church. So that was very, very strong for me. And I came back to England after this week of youth events, and I was like on fire. I don't know if you've ever met someone who's like totally on fire right after like a big conversion or something. They're kind of crazy. They got this, oh my God, I'm going to talk about Jesus all the time. That's how I was. So I come to my friends, dude, you got to understand that Jesus is awesome. He touched me, and my friends were like, what? He's the party friend. Like, Joe did. Calm down a little bit. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, dude, you gotta come. I'll show you. And they're like, what? I don't want to go. And I was that kind of crazy person. I went to my church. We should have the whole parish should get together. Let's have a big assembly and talk about how we can get things going here. And these old people were like, what? I was like totally, out of sync with what was going on, but I was pumped up. Well, as my friends were not as excited about this spiritual stuff as I was, I started to question, is something wrong? Did I miss something? Am I crazy? And then they were inviting me to go out, this was before we went to university, so it was right at the end of the summer. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go out. I don't want to go drinking. I'm like, what? So I sat at home, they were out at the bars, and I started questioning, wait, am I just going to be a loner all my life? Am I not going to have any friends? Am I going to just be, sad? Is that what following Jesus is about, was being sad all the time? So I started to question my conviction in this grace I had received, and started to think, and then, you hear this voice like, you're not going to be able to do this. Yeah, you got it right now, but in a month's time, are you going to persevere? In 2 months? No, you're going to go back to your old ways. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. The voice was there always, dragging me down, pulling me away. And the temptation was there, right? You're going to be unhappy. You're not going to have a good time. You're young, and you're going to waste your youth. All these kind of fallacious reasons, false reasons, trying to get me to be drawn away from the path that the Lord set me on. Okay, so think for yourself. Have you ever experienced a moment when you've been going from good to better in the service of God, and you've been tempted to be drawn away by these sorts of things, to be sad, obstacles, discouragement, false reasons? And also, how did the good Spirit work on you? Did you receive the peace, the consolation, the joy to draw you closer to the Lord? Just think for a moment for yourself. Okay, just share with your partner again, with your friends. Just one concrete example of maybe how this rule applies to your life. Okay, so we're going to keep moving. Alright, third rule. 4 rules, and then we'll finish. So, if there's anything you're going to take away from my talk today, is these next 2 rules. This is where St. Ignatius defines what he calls consolation and desolation. If you understand these concepts, these states of the soul, and are able to apply them to your life, your spiritual life will take a qualitative leap forward. Your interior life will grow exponentially by understanding these 2 states. Very, very important. So this is what he says. These are states of the soul. They're not states of the mind. They're not states of the body, right? Being tired, being, hungry or whatever. That's states of the body. States of the mind, and being depressed or being high or something. These are states of your soul that is in relationship to God. So this is consolation, spiritual consolation. He says, I call consolation when some interior movement in the soul is caused, in the soul, through which the soul comes to be inflamed with love of its Creator and Lord. And when it can, in consequence, love no created thing on the face of the earth in itself, but in the Creator of them all. Likewise, it sheds tears that move to love of its Lord, either out of sorrow for one's sins, or for the passion of Christ our Lord, or because of other things directly connected with his praise and service. Finally, I call consolation every increase of faith, hope, and charity, and all interior joy which calls and attracts to heavenly things, and to the salvation of one's soul, disquieting it and giving it peace in its Creator and Lord. Okay, so let's try to unpack it. There's a lot of things. So when your state, when your soul, when you feel the love of God, that's consolation. When you're inflamed with God's love, you feel his presence, that's consolation. But it's important to distinguish consolation from being happy. I pass my exam, I get a good grade, I'm happy. It's my birthday, we have a little celebration, I'm happy. That's great. That's not necessarily consolation, because consolation can be sad. I remember the first time I watched Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. You seen this movie?
Yes.
Yeah. I was overwhelmed by sadness. Really, really convicted in sadness. And Jesus is suffering for me. That was consolation, very deep consolation. But I was felt great sorrow. That is the proper state for meditating on the passion of Jesus. Or sorrow for sins. When you feel so much sorrow, you start crying because of what you have done wrong. That's consolation. That's drawing you to God. God also feels sorry for your sins. Right? When you feel great faith, great hope, great love, when you have joy, spiritual joy, when you have peace in your soul, that is consolation. So I remember I've received many graces in my life, many consolations. But I remember one, I'll just tell you about. So I was skipping forward now. I ended up discerning and then joining the Jesuits. I went back to the United States. And in the Jesuits, you do 2 years of formation called Vocation, which is intense spiritual formation, a lot of prayer, a lot of retreats, and that sort of thing. And at the end of that time, if you make it through those 2 years, then you write a letter, your novice master gives you permission and you write a letter to the provincial, you ask the provincial, I want to take vows. I want to commit myself to this life. Okay? And then the provincial decides whether to accept that letter or petition or not. So anyway, I wrote my letter. I finished my 2 years. I wrote my letter. And we were at a big gathering, all the people in formation, all the young Jesuits in formation, all together. And the provincial was there. And we had a meeting for like 3 days. And at the end of that 3 days, there was a final mass. And I was walking into the church to go to this final mass. And the provincial was there, vested to celebrate mass outside the church. He calls me over and says, Joe, he says, I read your letter, and I've accepted your petition. We will take vows in a month's time. So I was like, great, that's wonderful. I had a good sense I was going to be accepted. So I was happy. I went into the church, I knelt down, started praying, prepared for mass. And when the first note of the song, opening song, started, I was flooded with consolation. It was like going from 0 degrees, like freezing, to boiling point. I was just flooded with God's love, overwhelmed. I started to cry almost instantaneously. And for the whole Mass, I was literally weeping. I never wept so much in one Mass ever. And I was just overcome by His presence. That was consolation, deep, deep consolation. So take a moment to think, when have you experienced spiritual consolation in your soul? Being inflamed with love of God, intense joy and peace, faith. Think for a moment. Okay, maybe share with your partner again. Describe this moment of consolation that you had. Alright, last rule. Spiritual desolation. This is what's in English. Spiritual desolation. I call desolation all the contrary of the third rule, such as darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement of things low and earthly, the unquiet of different agitations and temptations, moving to want of confidence, without hope, without love, when one finds oneself all lazy, tepid, sad, and as if separated from his Creator and Lord. Because as consolation is contrary to desolation, in the same way the thoughts which come from consolation are contrary to the thoughts which come from desolation. Okay. Again, this is a state of the soul. This is not the same as depression. Depression is a habit of the mind and an emotion. This is a state of the soul. When you feel separated from God, you don't feel any presence of God at all. You feel as if your soul is in darkness. You're disoriented, you're confused, you're agitated, you're constantly being tempted to sin, right? You're just weak spiritually. No hope. No love. You don't care about anyone else. You feel no love whatsoever. You're sad. No hope. This thing isn't going to happen. There's no way out. Many of the Psalms talk about desolation. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Psalm 130. The very famous Psalm 22. My God, why have you abandoned me? after I took vows, property, chastity, obedience, and then I was sent to New York City to study philosophy at Fordham University. And the period of vows and afterwards was a time of deep consolation. I felt incredible love, incredible joy and peace. I loved everybody. I'd walk down the street, see a stranger, and I'd be like, I love you, man. I didn't say this, but I felt I was just full of love of God. And I would go into the chapel to pray, and I just oh, this is great. But over time, that consolation ebbed away, and then I hit a period of dryness, where I go in the chapel and nothing would happen. No water. I put my bucket down, my spiritual bucket down into the well, and I pulled out, whoosh, drowned. No water. Okay, no movement at all. And then I started to get a little bit agitated, and then I started to question, wait a second. I just gave my life, I put my life on the line for you, God. I'm supposed to be getting what you're supposed to give me, right? This joy, this peace, this love. But it wasn't coming, and then I started to get a little angry. No, that's not the deal. The deal was I give my life, and you give me what I want. I want your presence. I want your love. But that wasn't what was coming. So then I started to kind of turn away from God. And I started to question, did I make the right decision? And then I started to turn towards this kind of darkness. I couldn't. And then I started to get kind of irritated with people in community, right? Some guy wouldn't wash his plate. What's that? I started pointing out people's faults. I become very negative. But I started to feel really separated from God. There was a lot of emptiness inside. Months. Emptiness. No light. Constantly agitated and tempted. That's where I felt. Desolation. So again, just think for a moment. In your own life, when have you been in a state of spiritual desolation? Where you felt separated from God. You felt sad. And alone. With no faith left, not believing, not hoping anymore. Think about it. Okay, this last one, just share with your partner, share with your friend, an experience of desolation you may have had. Okay, so honestly, that's all I really want you to remember. If you identify in your soul consolation and desolation, you've taken the next step in your ability to discern. But just so that this makes it more real, why does this matter? So it matters for many reasons, but I won't go into many of them. I try to apply this to vocational discernment, drawing it back to this question, what should I do with my life? So yeah, let me just read this from St. Ignatius as an illustration of why consolation and desolation will help you in discerning your Vocation. So this comes from St. Ignatius' autobiography he wrote, or he dictated a short autobiography about his life. And this is the time of his conversion. And so you're going to see in a moment that St. Ignatius got hit by, he was a soldier, he got hit by a cannonball, and then he was taken back to his home, and his leg was in pretty bad shape. And he had to spend many months laying on a bed, basically, as it healed. He had nothing to do. And they gave him 2 books to read, A Life of Jesus and A Life of the Saints. So he just sat there and read these books, and he would daydream. And during the daydreaming, he would think about what he wanted to do with his life. And so he says, he had many vain desires, okay? Base, earthly desires. He said, many foolish ideas that occurred to him, that is, to Ignatius. He speaks in the third person. He imagined what he would do in the service of a certain lady, the means he would take so he could go to the place where she lived, the quips, the words he would address to her, the feats of arts he would perform in her service. Okay, so he had a crush on a noble woman. We think that she was maybe one of the members of the royal family. Okay, so he was thinking about it. He wanted to go like a knight, and go and serenade her, show off his skills, to try to woo her. Okay? That's what he thought about lying on his bed. It's very, very natural. But then, because he was reading the lives of the saints, he had other ideas that would come to his mind. In reading the life of our Lord and of the saints, he stopped to think, reasoning with himself. What if I should do this which St. Francis did, and this which St. Dominic did? Thus he pondered over many things that he found good, always proposing to himself what was difficult and burdensome. And as he so proposed, it seemed easy to him to accomplish it. Okay, so other times, instead of thinking about serenading this noble woman, he thought about, hey man, St. Francis Xavier went out in the fields in a little mud hut and served the poor. I could do that. St. Dominic went around preaching and converting heretics. I could do that. So he started thinking about himself doing those things. So that was his other preoccupation. But then he reflects. This is the Discernment of Spirits now. This is what he reflects in his mind. There was this difference between these 2 sets of thoughts. When he was thinking of those things of the world, going after this woman, he took much delight in them. But afterwards, he was tired and put them aside. He found himself dry and dissatisfied. But when he thought of going to Jerusalem barefoot and of eating nothing but plain vegetables and of practicing all the other rigors that he saw in the saints, not only was he consoled when he had these thoughts, but even after putting them aside, he remained satisfied and joyful. So he comes to see, through no other means than self-reflection, reflection of himself, that these 2 different sets of thoughts had 2 different impacts on his soul. The worldly thoughts about him being great and successful in the world and getting the girl and all that left him empty and dry, led him into desolation, basically. But then when he thought about being a saint and doing what the saints did, he was given consolation. He says, he remained satisfied and joyful. So that's where the discernment comes in. Follow the consolation. Where the consolation is, that's where God is. That's where God is leading. So the message that comes with that consolation, or the idea that comes with consolation, is God moving you in that direction. So be aware of that. And the ideas and the thoughts and the actions that are leading to desolation are not from God. So the guidelines for discernment, this is the end. Pray, obviously. Pray much. Follow the consolation. Where is God's consolation? Where is He giving it to you? That's where He's leading you. And then seek God's will, not your own. That's very difficult. But that's the purpose of our life. And then try to be detached from either path. That's a whole discussion for another day. Try to be free so that you can go where God is leading. So that's Well, that's been helpful.